Welcome to the On Stage podcast, where we interview musicians and members of the entertainment community. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. I appreciate you watching. Is Lee Schneider, and he's a novelist and podcast producer focused on the future. His 30-year career in media includes podcast production, TV documentaries, and series with the History Channel. I'd love to find out about that. Discovery Channel, Court TV, Food Network. Wow, Food Network. Really? What did you go around tasting different treats or something? And also Dateline, NBC, and Good Morning America. So I hope we can fit all this in. Um, so, Lee, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much. It's nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Um, I'd like to ask you to go back to the beginning. Like, how did your early life experiences shape your aspirations and career choices?
That's an interesting question. I started writing short stories in high school. And I remember there was this teacher I had a crush on, this woman named, we'll call her Gwen. And I wrote a story that made her laugh. And I was so impressed with that. Like, wow, I can write something that would make somebody laugh just off the page. And I think that early storytelling and writing and getting comfortable with kind of packaging ideas got me started way early on. And then a little later in high school, there was a cinematography club, and we made mostly terrible but really fun movies. Uh, where I did a few really high art conceptual movies that had windshield wipers going on a windshield on a car. Very Jean-Luc Godard. I thought I was in that group, and we also did some very silly like slapstick, like jumping off things kind of movies. And all of that kind of media making felt very new. I didn't know anyone who was doing that. My dad worked in television, so I knew that the people could actually do that. They could make media, and I think those couple of things really started to shape the ideas. Hey, this is possible. I can do this.
That's a very interesting story. So, can you recall like a specific moment or event that set you on that path to where you are today?
Well, I think there was the short story, the little moment that I mentioned, and also making a movie. At the time it was Super 8. I was developing the film myself and editing it in a little editor, and actually showing that to somebody,
Mhm.
and seeing the class laugh or whatever, get interested. The room would get quiet. That had a big impression on me. Also, when I later on I started writing plays, and I was living in New York, and just sitting in the back of the theater and just experience. No, don't watch the actors. I'd already directed the actors. I'd had plenty of time with the actors, but sit in the back of the theater and watch the audience, and watch where they got restless, or when they started to cough, or when they leaned forward a little. Those were very formative moments, because you get that feedback loop going, and you realize that I could construct this thing that other people could get into and like.
Yeah, do you think that anybody had bad feedback or negative comments relating to what you were doing? Like you
Oh,
know,
sure. Oh, yeah. I've had, well, very early on, I had a play uh, that went to off Broadway, not off Broadway, but off. And we later moved it off. But a person who was a relative who shall remain nameless said that it put her to sleep. And that was hard to get over. Like sometimes people will come at you a bit, and I've had bad reviews here and there. I've had wonderful reviews, of course, but everyone says I don't read reviews. But when you're a playwright, somebody reads the reviews. The actors are going to read the reviews, and they'll say, "Hey, have you read that review?" And I'll say, "No, no, no, I don't read reviews." But then, of course, you have to go read it. So yes, there were some naysayers, definitely.
I know exactly what you mean, Lee, because I remember at one time I was dating and this girl I really liked, and she heard me singing, And she said, "Don't give up your day job." And that affected me for 10 years because I didn't open my mouth and I didn't even sing a
Mm,
note for 10 years. But 10 years,
yeah,
it was like,
right,
it really affected
right.
me.
Yeah,
Um,
these things are very powerful. What other
it,
people say to you.
yeah, it's very interesting how you mentioned about you write screenplays. So, what do the plot lines entail in these screenplays?
Wow. I'll try not to make it a long answer. Uh, when I was writing plays in New York, and I started writing what are called spec screenplays, where you
Mm,
write a speculative story. So I began, that's what you did in those days. And was trying to write commercially viable things. So that meant action screenplays, historical action, comedies. In those early days, I just kind of whatever, I would
mm,
write if I had the impulse to write something, I would write it. So a screenplay of mine was read by the folks at Disney, and they thought it was interesting. So
mm,
I had agents in those days. I had agents for this kind of writing, and I was living in Brooklyn, New York, and they of course were in California, and the area codes were not that different. Brooklyn is and was a 718, and they were in 818. So when I was on the phone, they were thinking like I'm maybe some suburb of where they were. So they would say things like, "We like the script. Can you be here tomorrow?" And I say,
mm.
"Yeah, sure." And I would literally book a flight and show up in the office the next day. And I did that for a little while until I realized it was nuts. And I started writing more. I wrote cartoons. I wrote for Thundercats. I wrote Super Mario Brothers. I wrote a Peter Pan episode. I wrote sitcoms. I wrote TV dramas. Some spec scripts, some paid, and I wrote a lot of screenplays. Of almost any kind you can think of, from action to romance to not that many comedies, but all kinds of things. So it's hard to nail it down because in those days I just was trying to write what I thought would sell. What would be optioned, or I wasn't really writing from the inner self as much as listening to agents or trying to read the market. And that is a hard thing to do. You often end up doing what I did, which is just writing for all kinds of things. Is whatever comes along, I'll take it, kind of thing.
Well, you had to write screenplays, you had to write dramas, you had to write for Disney and cartoon, then you have to deal with your mental health. So, how are you able to
Yeah.
deal with your mental health?
Well, I loved the writing. And I loved at that time, we had just come to California. I was a young father of soon to be two children.
Mm.
And I was really enjoying that aspect of things because New York felt very closed down to me, very, grids and streets and kind of depressing. And California was like this wonderland, where anything could happen. I really felt that I could walk into any office and pitch anything and get a deal, or get enough of a deal. So the mental health was erratic
Mhm.
because as a freelancer, you go deal to deal and moment to moment, but it was also kind of exhilarating and, a little out of control, but exhilarating for a while. Uh, it's hard to do that over the long term, which is kind of the next chapter of this, which I found. Just to go job to job is pretty tough. Actors feel it and writers feel it. So I did eventually kind of hit a wall there in that.
How much of Lee Schneider's character and personality is in these stage plays and these screenplays?
Well, naturally, quite a lot. But there's a weird thing that happens when you're really writing from the inside, that these characters emerge who you don't know, and you've never spoken to that person, and it's not me and it's not someone I know, but it's a person who somehow I'm mystically connected with. It sounds strange, and it is strange. And people talk about characters who start to tell you what they want. or tell or sort of cast themselves or come in. Uh, a successful early play I wrote, stage play, was about Benedict Arnold, the
Mm.
Revolutionary War figure, and I just started writing this crabby general in the army. You know, I've never even been in the army, and it was very convincing and compelling. And later on, while writing a podcast audio drama many years later, kind of access that character again, where I found that person. So sure, all of it is, a reflection of the self, but there are these people who show up who are pretty compelling and have a lot to say and try to get cast in the book or the movie, and sometimes you have to fire them. I mean, these are all made up people, of course, and sometimes they make a compelling case for themselves. So it's pretty. I find that one of the most interesting parts of this sort of writing. This fictional writing.
What's the difference between a screenplay and a teleplay? Like, what's the difference?
Well, yeah, another interesting question. Well, a teleplay and a screenplay just differ often in terms of budget. You're a teleplay, you can't go anywhere and do anything. You're limited to certain places, sets. Like I was writing for one TV show and they said, okay, here are the 7 sets that we're going to have up that week when we're shooting your episode. So you have to make it take place in the elevator, in the garden. They
Mm.
gave me a list where the scenes would take place. Screenplays, especially spec screenplays, are more open ended. You're doing what you want, you know, and you do think about budget, and people will say, you just can't put that scene there. It's going to be too expensive. So think of something else. A lot of times, though, the characters are very much limited by, if you're writing for a series, say you're writing for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, well, you could have a new character come in who's a new adversary or something, but basically you're writing for the turtles. So you have to figure out what would they say and how would they be. So you're fitting your vision of whatever wild, crazy vision you have into that construct. There's what's called a show Bible for all of these ongoing shows, and it tells you, Leonardo, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, Leonardo would say this and Donatello would say that. And so, and that on TV, writing for TV series too. So you're not kind of freely making things up. Uh, you're adhering to the structure that they already have most of the time.
Yeah. So, what about the audio drama? How did you create
Mm,
those? Because there's no, I take it audio dramas. There's no face or video involved, so it must be a little bit
right.
easier.
It kind of is and it kind of isn't. I mean, as they say in audio, your special effects budget is unlimited because you're just thinking of what people can put in their
Mhm.
heads. So there was very I've written 3 of them. Uh, one was a pilot and 2 I've published, put out there. And they're a bit like one-act plays to me. I try to keep them in the 20-minute range. I tend to write shorter ones. And there's one called Mission of the Lunar Sparrow, which is still getting views and still rolling along. And that was just a 2-character play, essentially, with an actor who had her lines and a bot. Actually, it was a bot. It was a synthetic voice created by AI, but in the audio drama rather, it was a bot. So it was kind of playing itself. So writing a 2-character piece, you have to have scenes, you have to have places where it takes place, you have a layer of sound effects that kind of builds a place for it where it will happen. And all that to me is really fascinating and fun. And, it's a bit strange because you really have to think through things like, if someone leaves the room in the scene, they can't just disappear. You usually have to put in a door closing or steps or something to indicate that the person is gone. Otherwise, what happened to that person? And if you have more than 3 or 4 people in a scene, well, how can the listener keep track of all those people? They need really different voices. So you can't have four men with similar sounding voices in the scene. You have to have four people with very different sounding voices so we can keep track. A lot of those things really, I got really into those things because you need to think, people are visualizing it, but in their heads, and you have to have the space in your mind, but of course it's not really there. So those are some of the fun parts of doing audio dramas.
That's very interesting because I've heard a lot of audio dramas. Many of them, when the person is leaving the room, you hear the door shut, and they either add, "Oh, he's gone," or they either add, "Hey, I told you not to shut the door," or something. But I understand that.
Yeah, it's I learned I learned about this in the reverse way, in kind of an upside down way. When I was writing cartoons, we would write scenes, and if they took place, say, on a planet, then you could say, person A or character A is 50 feet away from that person. And the animators would know, okay, it's on a planet and they're like that. But when I started writing, some of the cartoons I wrote were in space, 3D space, with ships flying around. And the animators came back and said, well, where's that ship in relation to this ship? And I started to realize, it's called blocking on a in a theater. You say this actor's upstage, this actor's downstage, this actor's on the side, this actor's over there. But in a movie or even in an audio podcast, your blocking is kind of in 3D. It's 4D. I don't know. I don't know how many Ds, but you really have to start to, even though it's not visual, you have to visualize like how far away is that person. If they're in a parking garage, what does that sound like? What
Mm.
other sounds are in there to convince me? Can we dial their voices back so it sounds kind of echoey, even though it was recorded in a studio? Yes, of course. There are a few podcast audio dramas that actually record with the actors standing up and they're moving around and they're using wireless mics. And I haven't done that. I've done more kind of studio based where it's either a table read where everyone's just reading their parts and we have microphones, or I've done a few remotely where the people are, doing like what we're doing here, but we change the audio enough so it sounds like they're outside or it sounds like they're in a big empty room or whatever we need to do.
It's
So it's
amazing.
it's a strange hybrid. Yeah, I like it because it's very unpredictable. It's a real challenge to figure out some of these things.
Where do Foley artists fit in?
Well, brilliant people, right? I mean, I've done a lot of my own Foley. Uh, Foley refers to it's an actual thing where you would get a box of gravel and you would put two shoes on
Hmm.
sticks and you would make the sound. Uh, I've rarely had to go to those lengths because there's huge libraries of audio effects now. You know, cars, people, rocket ships, whatever you want. And it's a question of digging through all those effects to find the perfect beep for me, or the perfect switch, or the perfect door. If it's a door in a spaceship, it's going to sound differently than a door in a room. If it's a spaceship spinning up, like what do those engines sound like? Do you have to? I've had audio designers make engines. I say it kind of sounds like this, but a little bit like that. So make me something that sounds like the spaceship spinning up. And I would commission it and use it. So Foley artists, yeah, it's a huge, you can have like, I don't know how many tracks you'll have at the end of this, but in my audio dramas, I'll hit 20, 30 tracks, meaning actor one, actor two, maybe
Mm.
actor three, room presence, effects, music. It can go on and on to create these layers of sound for people.
That's interesting. Yeah, I wonder what they get paid to do all that, especially in films when you see a lot of these Foley artists doing the shoes and the gravel, and so that's what you do. That's your job as a Foley artist. So I mean, like, and
It
I
can be
guess,
pretty creative, though. I mean, you
mm,
can, a lot of that stuff is already recorded. So what becomes interesting is what does it sound like when someone's walking on the surface of Mars? Like, what is that Foley like? Or what does it sound like in this room that is a temperature controlled, climate controlled room? And you need to say that, you need to make that clear to people. Those are special things that, someone has to make.
Hey, I wanted to ask, did the writer's strike affect you at all?
Not this time because I was not writing under any covered services.
Hmm.
My podcasts are free, and the other work I was doing was producing. It did affect me severely when I first came to California. There was an earlier writer's strike. There's been about three, I think,
Mm.
three major ones. And I came to California to write, and all my deals fell apart. And I ended up becoming a typist because I could type really fast. And I didn't want to work as a scab, I didn't want to work as a writer. So, and I didn't want to cheat on that at all. So I would go into temporary typing agencies and say, I can type really fast. And they say, no, you can't. You can't, you're just some guy. But at that time, I could type really fast, like 90 words a minute and with
Wow, that's
statistical. So I got hired out as a statistical typist, typing numbers and typing fast. Luckily, I haven't had to do that since.
that is interesting. Um, I was reading somewhere that you actually, I think you said you wrote for Court TV. Are you telling me that Court TV is actually scripted? Because I always thought that was true. That was all happening.
Well, they had a series at the time called The Investigators, which was more documentary, less reality TV. So it was actually a documentary piece about a missing person. And we did recreations and we did have actors, but the interviews were with prosecutors and with
Mm.
lawyers and people like that.
Wow, that's you have quite interesting there, quite interesting job there. Um, so now, Good Morning America, and also so Dateline NBC and Good Morning America. Did you literally get a chance to meet them, or you
Yeah.
just do everything
At
behind the scenes?
Well, when I wrote for Good Morning America, I was a like a freelance guy that they
Mm.
eventually brought into the Writers Guild, and I think they originally hired me because I could walk to work. I lived on the Upper West Side,
Wow.
and when they needed someone to fill in, that's how I started as a fill-in guy. And I met all the talent and met some of the guests, and I one of my jobs was pre-interviewing guests, just calling them up at the time on the phone and just asking them questions so we get a sense of how the segment would go. In Dateline NBC, I worked in Burbank in NBC studios. Like I walked past Jay Leno's car every morning
Nice.
to go into work,
Wow.
and those studios are so much fun to work in because it's the real deal. They're shooting television shows and news shows, and the sets are up, and it's all pretty cool.
Who was the one person that you actually bumped into that made you go, "Oh, starstruck"?
That's interesting. Well, I was kind of fun to see Jay Leno get into he drove a different car to work every day.
He's got a ton of cars,
Sometimes
actually.
he's got a ton of cars. So
Yeah.
sometimes it would be a $300,000 Bugatti, and sometimes it would be a Stanley Steamer, a steam car.
Wow.
So that was kind of like, and we could go watch the show tape at any time. So like sitting up in the bleachers, and watching them rehearse and stuff like that was kind of a cool starstruck moment. I loved all the correspondence, Maria Shriver and Stone Phillips and um,
Maria
Josh
Shriver.
Mankiewicz and
Did you
John
meet Arnold
Larson.
Schwarzenegger at all?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
I did a documentary on him for the Learning Channel, and I went in and met with him in his office
Gee.
and talked to him, which was pretty cool. That was definitely fun. And at first he said he wasn't going to cooperate with the documentary, but then he gave us all these he decided to cooperate, and he gave us the name of his first acting teacher and Tom Arnold and other actors and people who had been co-stars with him and things like that. So it was a lot of fun to connect with people like that. I mean, I when I was working for A&E Biography, I met a lot of I met Jack Lemmon a couple of times. I
Mm,
interviewed Harrison Ford was an interesting interview.
nice.
All these actors who I would be the guy asking the questions, and then they would cut me out and just use Harrison Ford's answer or whatever it was.
That's amazing. So when you had all these, I want your job, by the way. You want to switch? Like, what kind of challenges or setbacks that you had in hindsight played a crucial role in your personal development?
Well, you know, I've learned that for a while at Dateline, I did investigative stories, which means you try to find the bad guys and get
Mhm.
something on them and do a story. And I learned that when you go after people, they come at you. It's not like they say, "Oh, fine, this guy's doing an investigative piece on me. I'm just going to be nice." And I learned that if you're going to do that, you have to have a stronger constitution than I have.
Mm,
Because, people would say about me, "You're too nice to be in television." And it may be true, So I discovered that the type of piece you're going to do, if you have the guts to be an investigative reporter, you're going to be hanging around some pretty rugged people because that's what that is. And if you're going to want to do light comedies or something like that, that's the kind of people you get to hang around with. So although I've met so many wonderful people in all these media positions, if you're going to work the hard jobs, there's going to be kind of a rough edge to them. And I learned that didn't really want to do that for my whole career. It was great to do it for these segments that I did it in, but I'd rather be writing a sci-fi audio drama right
hmm.
now than
Cool.
digging into, say, an investigation. It's just not my constitution right now.
Wow. I'd love to be doing that. In fact, I wrote one play when I was in high school, and I do a few voiceovers, but nothing as extreme as you, my friend. Wow.
Well,
What a job.
well, the fun part is actors. Working with actors is
Hmm.
so amazing because they show you so much. You can when they're reading the part and they'll say, say you're doing the first read, you're trying it out, and they say, "I don't understand that line." And you realize, "Oh, that's because I didn't write that line well enough
Mm,
because that line is not specific enough or it doesn't tell them enough about themselves so they can play it." And to hear your words that were banging around in your head read aloud by other people who are trying to embody them, it's an amazing feeling. And that you just learn so much. They teach you so much about writing and how to do it right and how to help them bring it to life. And that's one of my favorite parts about the fiction stuff.
yeah, I mean, you're writing for all these like screenplays, teleplays, stage plays, but you're also a chief strategist at Red Cup Agency, a podcast production agency. What exactly is a chief strategist? What do they do?
Well, a lot of times, people will come to me now. Podcasting is my main gig during I'm writing still fiction stuff, but my main gig is podcasting. And people will come to me saying, "We have a new podcast. We have zero followers. We have zero social media,
Mm,
and we want to find out where the audience is, and we want to find out how many shows a week should we do, or how long should our episodes be, and
mm,
should we have this guest or that guest, all the questions of some of it quite logical, like how
mhm,
long is a good episode, but some of it is, well, where is the audience for this show? uh, who will listen? And I think that's what a strategist does. They help you
mm,
see and hear who's going to listen. Where are they? Do we advertise to them? Do we do interviews like this? But how do we reach the audience that we need to reach with the show? So that's for me the
mm.
strategist part.
Do you think I should be uploading my podcast episodes on a Tuesday like I usually do at 8 p.m.? I was told that was
Uh,
a, or Thursday at 8 p.m. What do you think?
well, the key there is habit building and consistency.
Hmm. Okay.
So if people come to expect, if you look at your stats, And if people come to expect that a new episode is going to show up on X day at Y time,
Hmm.
guess what happens? They listen. That we do a podcast now for glow.com, which is a wellness and well-being website,
Wow.
global website. And we post our episodes on Sunday at 8 a.m. And
8 a.m.
after 8 a.m., because that's when people are either thinking about doing yoga, because they do a lot of, the site talks about yoga a lot, thinking about doing yoga or wishing they were doing yoga or feeling guilty that they're not doing yoga. Something about that Sunday morning moment is where you can literally see the spike in the
Hmm.
listenership just right at that time, because a lot of people will at least trigger the stat, let's say, by accessing the podcast. At least they'll start, they'll see it come up in their email or their subscription, and they'll at least start to press play, and then you get the ping, you get a spike and you get to see it. They may not listen to the whole thing right then and there. They may come back to it, or sometimes they do. The other fascinating stat that I love is how long do people stay listening to the show? Do they,
Hmm.
if you record an hour podcast, do they listen to the whole thing? If you record a 20-minute podcast, do they make it all the way through?
Hmm.
And the answer depends on the subject and the host and lots of things. But I have podcasts that go an hour and a half, and the loyalists will just stay for the whole 90 minutes. I have other podcasts that I'm producing now that are 20 minutes on the button. We cut them down to be 20 minutes because the client wants it to be kind of like a quick hit.
Hmm.
And that is effective for them. That's what they're looking for.
So you think 20 minutes or 30 minutes to an hour is a better, or you think I should cut my podcast down to maybe 30 minutes an episode or 45?
It really depends on what you're going for, and you can
Hmm.
look at your own stats. I mean,
Hmm.
the sweet spot for many podcasts, just out of the box, is around 20 to 40, 20 to 30 minutes. You get, 60% of the people will hang in before they start to drop off. But if it's a topic that interests somebody, uh, a certain neurologist or something, we've had doctors on the show, they will listen to that hour straight through, loyalists who just love it. So you have to look at averages and look at like what really performs the best for you. And some people aren't looking for, they're not going to stay with the whole thing, and that's okay. They want people to get the first 20, 30 minutes, and that's good. And if more people really love what's happening and what they're talking about, keep going. It is an argument for putting the interesting stuff in the beginning, not having too much filler in the beginning, and kind of getting to stuff within the first 20 minutes, because that's when most listeners, that's their sweet spot.
I want to talk to you about your five nonfiction books, but I want to talk about like you did something on an episode like your online identity is already stolen and how long
Mm.
before working for robot overlords. I got a lot of to talk about on that, but that's going to take too long. But so, what do you think about online privacy? Is there really privacy?
Well, that's a very good question. I would say no. There's not as much privacy as we think. But what's even more interesting to me is that people who say, "I don't care about my online privacy. It's all out there. I have nothing to hide,"
Hmm.
which is a common phrase. But you you do have something to hide if you become a political activist, if you
Hmm.
move into anything beyond outside of the mainstream. People already know our address or phone number. I know because I get so many junk calls, but people know a lot about us already. And what becomes tricky is when there's a data breach or when someone wants to put the pieces together, they can find out quite a lot about a person that you may not want them to know. Like, what are you buying at the pharmacy? You can
Hmm.
see your location data to see you go to the pharmacy, but if there's a data breach or it gets figured out, you could also know what your prescriptions are, or what medications you're taking, or what doctors you see. And this, when it gets rolled into an overall tapestry of information about a person, sounds like too much to me. I wouldn't want all of that out there for prospective employers, for, you know, people, for for people who would, digging into me a little bit or digging into you. I mean, how much should they know? So what's happened is we think of all of these data points as siloed, separate data points. But there's some AI out there or some company out there who's putting them all together. The car companies, since we all drive computers with wheels, if we're driving a late model car, the car companies have been handing off your location data to data brokers. In other words, when your car drives around, they're handing off that information so that they know where your car's going. Now,
Yeah,
maybe by itself, so what? But maybe combined with other information, maybe that matters.
yeah. You brought up a good point there, Lee, because it reminded me of that movie "Leave the World Behind." And you've seen that part at the end with all the self-driving cars crashing into each other.
Yeah.
That was one of the. I'm thinking that could happen, but then it
Hmm.
brought to mind Minority Report as well with Tom Cruise.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But have you ever seen a movie Anon? It's a Netflix movie.
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
Oh my goodness! You want to talk about AI and about power of tech and society and everything like that? I'm afraid that there's going to one day be like you're going to be spending Christmas with your family, and then you're going to see a drone outside watching you. What are you
Why
doing?
not?
I mean, like that's
Right.
scary.
I think it's more, it can certainly get scary. But my goal right now in writing the novels I'm writing and some of those essays is to just ask, could we take a look? Could we examine this? We're kind of going through it, just doing stuff. Like
Hmm.
we'll download something to our phone because we want to use it, like Amazon Echo Dot or TikTok or
Hmm.
something, and we'll give it all these permissions. Oh, that's fine. I just want to use this thing. I'll let it have all that information about me. It can look at my camera and it can listen to my audio and it can access my contacts. And I just want people to start thinking about, well, do you really need to have that app? Do you really need to do that? Because you're actually probably giving up more than you're getting. You
Hmm.
might be getting a fun little app, or you might be getting some, you think, access to something, but that the makers of that app are getting a lot more access to you. And do you want that? Is that good?
I know. I mean, after watching that movie, Leave the World Behind, what makes us think
Hmm.
there's not some hacking corporation out there that all they have to do is do this and shuts everything down? Everything is down,
Well,
like banks, money,
why not?
whatever. It's like
Yeah. I mean, hospitals have been hacked, schools have been hacked,
it's.
and the people doing this are doing it probably for mostly for money and sometimes just for mischief. They're not serious sometimes, and sometimes, of course, they're dead serious.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's just starting to think about how much of ourselves do we want to give up to the online world. And look, let's be realistic. We're doing this right now. It's online. When I finish talking to you, I'm going back on the computer and I'm working for the rest of the day on mostly online things. So I'm not pretending that people are going to creep away into the dark, but it's just an examination of what are we really doing? And do we need to do all this stuff? And what rights are we giving away without thinking, without consent?
I don't know, Lee, because you have to deep fake Tom Cruise, and how do you know that one day Biden or some other president is actually going to be him and not just somebody they pay to be, while he's out there,
Well,
whoever it is on the beach somewhere. So that's
it could happen.
you don't know, but that's. I mean, here we have to cope with anxiety about climate change, but now people are going to have to worry about whether their whole identity is going to be stolen. There's going to be a Lee Schneider out there, and let's talk to him online, and it's actually not you, but there's a deep fake sitting there.
Right.
So,
There are people working on watermarking and
mm,
fake detection. And what will probably happen, probably a little bit too slow, is that there will be watermarking and there
mm,
will be proof of life and proof of real that's going to have to be put together. And it's just like when anybody gets a robocall or a junk call or a fake email, we're going to video will be the same. We'll have hopefully the same skepticism about video things, whatever they might be, the same skepticism that we have about robocalls and fake emails and phishing emails and all of that.
Yeah, and also learning how to cope with anxiety about climate change. Like, how do you do that? Like, we know that we know that the climate is getting worse. We know about, like, even here, there was hardly a winter here, and people are kind of like, there's anxiety. Like, what are they exactly anxious? Like, what's the anxiety all about? This climate change. What's that all about? Can you give me a short answer on that one?
I think it's helplessness
Mm-hmm.
and misdirection. There are
Mm.
two things going on here, in my opinion. One is that we don't really know what to do because it's such a big problem. We've never encountered a global problem like this without borders. The other problem is misdirection and misinformation, that the fossil fuel companies are spending literally billions of dollars to convince us that they're okay
Well,
and that we wouldn't have hospitals if it weren't for gas and oil, things like that. I saw a recent commercial to that effect. So we're getting confused, I think, as as a group, everybody. And to keep your eye on the ball is hard. One thing that everybody can do is just think about, what am I doing that uses energy, and what could I be better about not using so much energy?
mm-hmm.
But an even bigger, more important thing is, why do we let the fossil fuel companies reign over us still?
Mm.
We're told the only thing we can do is drive that kind of car. The only thing we can do is use this kind of natural gas. And I admit, change is hard. Like, I'm not going to junk my gas stove, but I have junked my internal combustion car, and I've gone to an electric hybrid car.
Wow.
And there are going to be more possibilities to do a better use of energy. Uh, and when someone's really stuck and doesn't know what to do, sometimes I just say and think about, well, why not go outside and appreciate what's out there, and think about what it would be like if you couldn't go for a walk, or if you couldn't see the sun, or even a little rain. Like, if we didn't have that, what would that feel like? And because we all spend so much time doing this, which is, again, fine,
Mm-hmm.
but we should also spend time appreciating nature and going out into the world. It's not that hard to do for many people. Sometimes I admit it can be hard. Like, if you don't get off work till night and you have to walk around at night, it's not so great. But to appreciate the earth from right here would be a first step for many people, just to say, well, would I miss that if it were gone? Will my virtual reality goggles really replace that? No, no, they
Oculus.
won't.
Yeah.
But it's in the interest of tech companies to say, sure, your VR goggles are going to be fine, just fine. But of course, they won't.
No, definitely not. I see that you have five nonfiction books. So can you give us a little bit of lowdown on those and what's the newest one that you'll be publishing? Your second novel.
Right. Well, a lot of my nonfiction books, the one I like the best right now is called The Angel Playbook, and it's about raising money from angel investors.
Oh,
It's kind of a
wow.
practical guide based on what I've learned and lots of interviews that I did. Uh, some of those earlier books, interestingly, have become outmoded, I have to say with honesty, because the internet has changed, and they were based
Yeah.
on internet marketing techniques that were great, when they were published. Uh, the two novels that I have, one novel out and I'm about to put another one out, are speculative books that take place in the future
Mm,
about what ifs. What if the climate were controlled by AI? What if there were an AI that kind of gained control of the government? What if you had someone you loved and they died, but you decided to create an AI avatar
Yeah,
that
that's
you could talk to that person. Well, if you're familiar with the great composer performer Laurie Anderson, she was married to the great composer Lou Reed.
is
When
she the
Lou
one that
Reed
wrote that
died,
song Superman?
yeah,
You know, okay.
yeah. So I think so. You might have to fact check that, and if we're wrong, you might have to cut that out. But I think she did. Um, she commissioned an AI of her husband, Lou Reed, after he had passed away, and she regularly talks to that AI. It's
Oh,
like a voice thing, and she loves it because it restores that person to her life.
wow.
So in the first novel, I write extensively about that. I in a fictional way, and in the second novel, it's more about how this small group of the resistance, a resistance group, will try to right the wrongs of AI and the overuse of tech, and how it's messing up the climate. Uh, and let's say that the tech bros are trying to take over and this group is trying to stop them from taking over. So I have
Wow.
one novel out called Surrender, which has been out for about a year or so, and another one coming out in a couple of months called Resist, part two of it, and then I'm going to be writing a part three, so it'll have three parts.
Those sound very interesting. I was reading that Laurie Anderson is the one that wrote the song "Oh Superman." Sorry, my fault.
Yeah, okay,
And she's
there you go.
trained in violin and sculpting. Yeah, wow, that's kind of interesting. I would never do that. Commission for an AI of my wife. I would never do that. Like, what are you talking to? You're not talking to your wife or your husband. You're talking to an AI. Like they
Yeah,
have.
it's pretty, yeah, it's
It's
bold.
it's scary.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's really scary. I mean, like ABBA did the same thing where
Hmm.
they have like holograms of themselves back in the 70s. Meanwhile, they were in the back singing all the songs. And then you have the Michael Jackson hologram. I'm like 90 years from now, people are going to watch Taylor Swift in another tour, but it's not really Taylor Swift. It's somebody else.
Possible. I
AI.
mean,
I
this
mean,
for these brands, this is the ultimate in brand extension. And as long as people will play ball and do it, these brands, it's great for the estates of those artists when they're no longer with us, or
mhm.
just for brand extension for the ongoing artist. It's a pretty good deal for them. I don't know if it's good for the world or good for society, but it's a good deal for them.
Yeah. Um, okay, before we end the stream, is there any words of advice you want to relay to our audience about writing or um, anything in particular that you might help?
Sure. Well, writing is a soul journey. It's an interior journey. And it's best, it works to value it for that. You may not come up with things you want to know about yourself. You may find yourself writing about some dark places or some light
Hmm.
places. But if you hand it off to an AI to do all the writing for you, you experience none of that personal journey, which for me is the point of writing. If you're going to write something, a diary, a poem, a book, whatever your audio drama, the first place you have to go is inside, and that's the value of it, that's the fun of it, and that's what matters. So if I have one little piece of advice, is just write anything, write in a notebook, write on a computer, but actually do the writing yourself.
Amazing. Thank you very much for the opportunity to interview you, Lee. Everything will be linked down below and much appreciative. Okay. Thank you
Thanks.
so much, Lee. Everyone, we're going to be ending the stream.